Have you ever wondered, why is it that some people can sleep in peace, while others lie awake in silence, trapped beneath the weight of unshed tears? There are wounds we never name, pains we bury in the hope they'll vanish. But they don't. They grow roots in the darkness of our silence. And one day, they bloom, not as flowers, but as thorns that prick us when we least expect. This is not a story about sadness. It's a journey into what happens when we refuse to feel. And why? According to one of the greatest minds in early Islamic philosophy, our refusal to cry may be the reason we've never truly felt peace. This is the emotional wisdom of Al-Kindi. And this is the truth no one dares to say. The strongest people are not the ones who never cry. They are the ones who've allowed themselves to feel, and survived it. We live in a world that teaches us to run from pain. If you're sad, smile. If you're heartbroken, distract yourself. If you feel like crying, laugh instead. We scroll. We binge. We numb. Anything but feel. But every time you silence a feeling, you add a layer of armor around your heart. And one day, you wake up with no idea what's underneath. Just noise. Just confusion. Just this aching distance between who you are and who you pretend to be. Al-Kindi, the 9th century philosopher often called the father of Islamic philosophy, believed that pain wasn't just an emotion. It was a message, a messenger sent by the soul to wake the mind. He didn't see sadness as weakness, but as a tool for growth. In his view, the intelligent person doesn't run from sorrow. They study it. They sit with it. They ask, "Why are you here? What are you teaching me?" Because sometimes, what breaks us is trying so hard not to break. When was the last time you truly felt what you were feeling? No filters. No justifications. Just silence and truth. We've become experts at emotional suppression. We say, "I'm fine," so often it becomes a reflex. But behind those words, a storm brews, quiet, invisible, and devastating. Uncried tears don't disappear. They sink deeper. And they find other ways to escape, through anxiety, restlessness, bitterness, and chronic emptiness. Al-Kindi teaches us that the more we run from pain, the more it chases us in other forms. To heal, you must stop running. There's a quiet kind of strength in crying. Not the dramatic, performative kind. But the silent tears shed alone, after a long prayer, or in the middle of the night when your soul whispers what your mouth could never say. Crying is not the end of strength, it's often the beginning of clarity. Modern culture teaches the opposite. We associate crying with breakdown, as if it's the moment we fall apart. But Al-Kindi, and many Islamic thinkers after him, saw it differently. Tears are a release, a form of surrender, and in that surrender lies wisdom. Because when we cry for the right reasons, we don't become weaker. We become cleaner. Like rain that clears the dust, tears cleanse the soul from the burdens we've carried far too long. Ask yourself honestly, what would happen if you stopped holding it in? What if, just for once, you let yourself collapse into truth instead of standing tall in denial? Would you really break? Or would you begin to heal? We cry not because we're fragile, but because we're real. And the soul, when ignored, speaks through tears. When children cry, we soothe them. We hold them. We tell them, it's okay to feel this way. But when adults cry, we shame them. We tell them to get over it. To toughen up. To be rational. But if you silence your soul long enough, it forgets how to speak. Al-Kindi knew this. That's why he believed wisdom was not found in logic alone, but in the balance between intellect and emotion. To live well, you must think deeply and feel honestly. To be whole, you must allow space for your soul to grieve what it lost, and still believe in what it can become. This isn't just philosophy. It's survival. Because if you cannot cry, you cannot cleanse. And if you cannot cleanse, you cannot begin again. Peace is not the absence of pain. It's the result of facing it, and finding yourself still standing. If you look at your life, what moment taught you the most? Was it a success? A celebration? A joyful memory? Or was it a time when you were shattered? We rarely admit it, but it's in the dark that we grow. It's in loss that we search. And it's in pain that we finally listen. Al-Kindi believed something that still feels revolutionary today. Pain is not your enemy. It is your teacher, a messenger of the soul. He wrote that all suffering, if understood correctly, can serve as a doorway to higher understanding. Not because pain is beautiful, but because it breaks down illusions. You see, we spend most of our lives chasing comfort, stability, control, certainty. We want the world to make sense. We want our hearts to feel full. But when things fall apart, we are forced to ask the questions we once avoided. And those questions are the beginning of real wisdom. What am I holding onto that's hurting me? What pain am I ignoring? What truth am I afraid to feel? These aren't easy questions. But Al-Kindi insisted they are necessary. Because only by facing what wounds us can we begin to discover who we really are beneath it all. In his writings, Al-Kindi explained that the purpose of philosophy was not to escape life, but to understand it more deeply. He saw pain not as a punishment, but as a signal. A reminder that something within you requires attention, compassion, and maybe change. He said, we ought not to be ashamed of recognizing truth from whatever source it comes. This includes the truth we find in heartbreak, in sorrow, in the tears we've tried so long to silence. The modern world has taught us to treat pain like a disease. We medicate it, ignore it, rush past it. But what if pain wasn't a problem to fix, but a message to hear? What if your sadness was trying to tell you, this life you're living isn't aligned with your soul? What if anxiety was your body's cry for rest, your heart's call for stillness? Al-Kindi believed these signals were sacred, not random, not meaningless, but guiding forces from within. There's a story in every ache, a wisdom hidden inside every moment of discomfort. The pain of loneliness tells us we need connection. The pain of failure teaches us resilience. The pain of regret shows us what we truly value. But we have to listen. And more importantly, we have to trust that pain has something to offer. Not just to wound, but to wake us up. In a world that says, feel better quickly, Al-Kindi would ask, feel better or feel deeper? Because sometimes, we are not meant to move on so fast. Sometimes, grief must stay a while. Not to punish, but to purify. We cry because something inside us is trying to leave. A version of ourselves we've outgrown. A memory we need to bless and release. A chapter that is ending so a new one can begin. This is not weakness. It's not regression. It's a sacred process. And every tear you shed in truth is a step closer to the life you're meant to live. Al-Kindi also warned against excess attachment, to people, to possessions, to outcomes. He believed that much of our pain comes from demanding permanence in a world of change. We suffer not because life changes, but because we resist its rhythm. And so the solution is not control, but acceptance. To allow the pain to pass through you, without turning it into your identity. You are not your sadness. You are not your failures. You are the one experiencing them, and you are capable of transcending them. So, when you feel pain next time, don't reach for distraction. Reach inward. Sit with your soul. Let it speak. Ask it, what are you trying to show me? Because behind every ache is an invitation, not to escape, but to awaken. Some say emotions cloud the mind. Others say reason kills the heart. But what if both are wrong? In the Islamic tradition, particularly in the writings of thinkers like Al-Kindi, there is no war between intellect and emotion. No artificial wall between reason and feeling. Instead, there is something far more beautiful: harmony. Al-Kindi believed that the soul has many layers. At the core is our desire to understand, to seek truth. But wrapped around that desire is a sea of feeling: joy, fear, hope, regret, and yes, pain. He didn't see emotion as a flaw to fix. He saw it as a tool, a companion on the journey of the mind. Modern culture often splits us in two. If you cry, they say you're too sensitive. If you think deeply, they call you too serious. But Al-Kindi knew something better. You were created to feel and think. You were designed to weep and wonder. Both are sacred. He believed that emotion could awaken the intellect. That a tear can open the same door as a thought. That the trembling of the heart can be the beginning of divine insight. Imagine a philosopher who cried, who paused during his writings not just to think, but to feel. To let sorrow pass through his pen. To let longing become language. That was Al-Kindi. To him, wisdom wasn't sterile. It had soul. And soul, by its nature, must sometimes break to let the light in. We often misunderstand strength. We think it's about hiding pain, putting on a brave face, holding it all in. But in the Islamic tradition, strength can look like tears in the night. Like whispering Ya Allah when no one hears you. Like admitting to God that you're lost, and trusting that He will guide you back. This is not weakness. This is surrender. And surrender is where the heart and mind meet. There is a verse in the Quran that many overlook. They fall upon their faces in tears, and it increases them in humility. Surah Al-Isra 17-109. Tears, in this context, are not shameful. They are a sign of closeness, of awakening, of a soul that feels the truth before the mind can explain it. That's what Al-Kindi cherished. For him, thinking wasn't just about logic. It was about remembering. Dhikr, the remembrance of Allah, the remembrance of your true self, the remembrance of what matters most. And you can't remember with only your brain. You need the heart. In one of his lesser-known works, Al-Kindi compares the soul to a mirror. When clean, it reflects divine light. But what clouds it? Desire, greed, anger, and also indifference. But what clears it? Tears. Sincere tears. Not of despair, but of longing. Not of weakness, but of awareness. He believed that crying over the state of your soul was a form of healing. That grief can be a form of gratitude, because it shows that your heart is still alive. In a world that praises detachment, Al-Kindi teaches us to feel fully. Not to drown in emotion, but to ride its waves back to understanding. Many of us try to think our way out of pain. We analyze. We distract. We over-explain. But sometimes, the answer is not in thinking more, it's in feeling honestly. Letting your soul speak in its ancient language of silence and tears. Even the Prophet Muhammad, the most complete human being, cried in prayer. He wept when remembering the Quran. He mourned his loved ones openly. His tears were not a sign of fragility, but of depth. And this depth is what Al-Kindi sought to cultivate. A depth that lets you sit with your sorrow, without shame. A depth that allows you to think clearly, because your heart is clear too. So the next time you feel overwhelmed, don't run from it. Don't bury it. Don't judge it. Instead, sit with it. Let the mind observe. Let the heart respond. And when the tears come, know that they are not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. Al-Kindi's wisdom reminds us that there is no true intellect without soul. No true soul without reflection. And no reflection without the courage to feel. So don't be afraid of your tears. They are the first chapter of healing, the first page in a wiser life, and sometimes the only prayer the soul can offer. Not all sickness lives in the body. Some sicknesses hide deeper, invisible to scans, untouched by medicine. Yet they ache. They ache in the quiet moments, in the stillness after the phone is put down, in the space between one task and the next, in the silence before sleep. That ache is the sickness of the soul. Al-Kindi understood something we're only starting to relearn, that the soul can get sick, and when it does, it sends signals. Fatigue without cause, sadness without name, anxiety without object, a constant feeling that something is off. But instead of listening to those signals, we drown them. We scroll, binge, distract, consume. We replace reflection with reaction. And pain, instead of being faced, gets buried. In his writings, Al-Kindi doesn't just describe spiritual illness, he dissects it. He speaks of nafs, the self that commands, and how, when left unchecked, it pulls the soul toward chaos. The nafs doesn't shout, it whispers. Sleep more, work harder, buy that, scroll again, don't think, just feel good. It pretends to soothe, but slowly, it suffocates. One of Al-Kindi's most powerful ideas is this: spiritual sickness is forgetting who you are. Forgetting that you were created for more than routine. That your life is not an accident. That your soul is not designed to be numb. He says that when the soul forgets its purpose, it clings to substitutes. Pleasure, power, distraction, temporary highs for a long-term hunger. And the more we forget, the more we ache. Modern life is full of forgetting. We forget our fitra, our natural state. We forget silence. We forget awe. We forget to be still. And because we forget, we suffer. Not because we're weak, but because we're disconnected. Disconnection is the soul's greatest pain. Disconnection from Allah, from meaning, from ourselves. Al-Kindi didn't just lament this, he offered a way back. He wrote about the importance of ta'ammul, deep reflection. To sit with yourself, to look inward, to ask the hardest questions. What am I really afraid of? Why am I always tired? What am I running from? He believed that the answers are already inside you, but they're buried beneath the noise. In our time, we treat symptoms. Sleep issues, melatonin, anxiety, a new playlist, loneliness, another app. But Al-Kindi wanted to treat the root. And the root, he believed, is often a soul that has not cried in years. A soul that has not spoken. That has not been listened to. He wrote that true healing comes from aligning the soul with its purpose. And that purpose is not performance. Not perfection. But presence. Being present with your emotions. Your thoughts. Your creator. That is where healing begins. If you've ever felt like you're just surviving, like your life is running without direction, you are not alone. Al-Kindi would say, this is not a personal failure. It is a spiritual signal. Your soul is knocking, and pain is the sound it makes when you don't answer. But the door is still there, always, and it doesn't require wealth, status, or knowledge to open. Just honesty and humility. One of the most overlooked hadiths is simple and profound. He who knows himself, knows his Lord. Al-Kindi took this deeply. To know God, you must confront yourself. Not the curated version, but the real one. The self that doubts. The self that grieves. The self that hopes. And when you sit with that self, you start to see that your sadness is not a curse, it's a compass. It's pointing you back to wholeness, to balance, to surrender, to peace. Not the peace of numbing, but the peace of knowing. Knowing that your soul is tired, because it has not been home in a long time. Al-Kindi believed that philosophy was not just for the mind, but for the soul. He wasn't trying to impress. He was trying to heal. His wisdom wasn't cold and abstract. It was warm. It was intimate. It came from a man who felt deeply, who asked boldly, and who cried quietly. Because he knew what modern life forgets. That a soul unlistened to becomes a soul unlived. But it's never too late to listen. And when you do, you may realize something incredible. You were never broken. You were just unheard. We spend our lives running from sadness. Not because we're weak, but because we were taught to be afraid of it. To cover it with busyness. To silence it with noise. To replace it with productivity. And so, sadness becomes the enemy. Something to be defeated, not explored. But what if sadness isn't trying to destroy you? What if it's trying to show you something? This is where Al-Kindi's wisdom shines. He didn't see sadness as a disorder. He saw it as a doorway, a crack in the armor of the ego, through which light can finally enter. Al-Kindi wrote extensively about grief, sorrow, and emotional pain. But he didn't see them as problems to be solved. He saw them as part of the soul's necessary journey. To feel deeply, he said, is to be alive. And to cry is not weakness, it's remembrance. It's the soul remembering that it longs for something eternal. Modern culture tells you to move on, to stay strong, to keep going. But the soul doesn't speak that language. It speaks in tears, in silence, in longing. And if we listen, really listen, we might hear the soul whispering, "I miss home." Sadness is not the opposite of faith. It is a companion of faith. Even the prophet wept when he buried his son. Even Maryam cried under the palm tree. Even Jacob lost his vision from grief. This is not weakness. This is love. This is what it means to be human. Al-Kindi believed that emotions are signs, messages sent by the soul. When you're sad, it's because something inside you knows. This is not how things should be. And that knowing, that ache, is proof that your heart still feels. That your fitra is still alive. But instead of facing sadness, we often bury it. We call it laziness. We call it burnout. We call it stress. But sometimes, it's grief. Grief for the person you used to be. Grief for the time you've lost. Grief for a version of yourself that never had the chance to live. And here is the secret Al-Kindi left us. Sadness becomes suffering only when we resist it. When we allow ourselves to feel, to cry, to grieve, to be vulnerable, sadness becomes sacred. It becomes a prayer without words. He described sorrow as a teacher. One that humbles us. One that strips away illusions. One that says, you are not in control. And that's okay. Because it is only when the ego breaks that the soul can breathe again. Imagine you are carrying a jar filled with muddy water. You shake it every day, always in motion, always distracted. The water never settles. You can't see through it. But the moment you stop, the moment you're still, the mud begins to sink. And what was always there becomes clear. That's what sadness does. It brings stillness. It invites clarity. It returns you to truth. In this way, sadness is not the storm. It's the silence after it. Where you finally hear what life's been trying to tell you. And often, what it tells you is this. You were never meant to carry this alone. So why do we fear sadness? Because we mistake it for isolation. We think no one else feels like this. That something must be wrong with us. But that's a lie. Everyone suffers. Everyone grieves. Everyone has nights they don't talk about. Even those who smile the most. Even those who seem strongest. And the irony is, the people who've cried the most often carry the most light. Not because they are perfect, but because they're real. Al-Kindi believed that truth lives in the vulnerable places, in the cracks, in the moments we hide from others. And in those moments, if we're willing to face them, something incredible happens. We stop pretending, we stop performing, and we start healing. You don't need to have it all together. You don't need to smile all the time. You don't need to run from your tears. Because your sadness is sacred. It's proof that you're alive. It's proof that your heart still feels. It's proof that you are human. And that humanity is where God meets you. Not in your perfection, but in your surrender. When you say, Ya Allah, I am not okay, that is not failure. That is faith. Al-Kindi reminds us, the soul cries not because it is broken, but because it wants to be whole. And every tear you've ever shed was your soul trying to come home. So next time you feel sad, don't run. Sit, listen, let the sadness speak, and you may find that behind the ache is a door. And behind the door is the light you've been searching for. We often say, one day I'll be okay. We imagine healing as something far away. A version of ourselves that's stronger, braver, more confident. We place peace somewhere in the distance. Somewhere after success, after closure, after clarity. But what if healing doesn't live in the future? What if it's not something to chase, but something to remember? Al-Kindi believed that healing doesn't begin when we become someone new. It begins when we return to who we were always meant to be. He described the soul as having a memory, not of trauma, not of pain, but of divine origin. It remembers the silence before the noise, the light before the wound, the fitra before the forgetting. And every moment of sadness, every moment of stillness, is a doorway back to that memory, back to your core, back to God. Healing, then, is not about adding more to yourself, but removing what doesn't belong. Not becoming someone else, but uncovering who you already are beneath the layers. You are not broken. You are buried, under expectations, under labels, under pain you didn't ask for. And healing is the sacred act of digging. Not with force, but with gentleness, with presence, with love. We live in a world that sells healing like a product. Fix yourself in 30 days. Become your best self. Level up. But Al-Kindi reminds us, the soul doesn't operate on deadlines. It blooms when it's safe, when it's seen, when it's honored, not rushed. Real healing is quiet. It happens when no one is watching. It happens in the mornings you choose not to give up. In the nights you let yourself cry. In the prayers you whisper through your tears. That's where your strength lives. Not in how loud you are, but in how deeply you feel. The prophet said, "Verily, in the body there is a piece of flesh. If it is sound, the whole body is sound. If it is corrupt, the whole body is corrupt. Indeed, it is the heart." Healing starts there, not in your schedule, not in your appearance, not in your achievements, but in your heart. And what does the heart need? It needs truth. It needs softness. It needs dhikr, remembrance. Because in forgetting God, we forget ourselves. And in remembering Him, we return. Not to a fantasy version of us, but to our real self. The one that was always worthy, always loved, always seen. Al-Kindi wrote that the soul experiences disharmony when it's disconnected from its creator, from its purpose, from its truth. And that's why so many of us suffer. Not because we're weak, but because we've been pulled too far away from home. Healing is not a new destination. It's a homecoming. So stop asking, when will I be healed? And start asking, what do I need to remember? Remember the moments when you felt peace. The prayers that made you weep. The verses that lit something in your chest. They were not random. They were reminders. You already have everything you need to begin again. Not because of self-help books, Not because of routines, but because of your soul. It knows the way. It just needs permission to speak. Al-Kindi said, "The greatest loss is the loss of oneself. And yet, the greatest mercy is that you can always return. No matter how far you've gone. No matter how many times you've forgotten. The door is always open. And every breath is an invitation. So take a breath now. Place your hand over your heart. And listen. There's a voice underneath the pain. A whisper beneath the noise. It says, you are not too late. You are not too lost. You are still worthy of peace. That is the beginning of healing. And it starts right here. In this moment, with your decision to remember who you are. How long have you been running? Not with your feet, but with your heart. Running from the silence, from the memories, from the mirror. You scroll, you work, you sleep, you fill the days with noise. Because if things go quiet, you might hear what you've been avoiding. But Al-Kindi, the philosopher of the Arabs, reminds us, no one finds peace by escaping. Because what you run from runs faster. It lives in your chest, in your breath, in your reflection. The only way out is in. Peace is not found at the end of a checklist. It's found in surrender, in finally sitting down with yourself and saying, I'm done pretending. I want to feel again. This kind of peace is not loud. It won't impress anyone, but it will heal you. It's the peace that comes when you let go. When you cry for real. When you pray without asking for anything, just wanting to be close. It's the peace that arrives when you're no longer at war with yourself. Some of the most peaceful people you'll ever meet have cried more than anyone you know. Not because they're weak, but because they stopped hiding from their hearts. They let the water soften the wounds. They let the night carry their grief to the one who never sleeps. And somewhere in between the sobs, they found something sacred. Tears are not shameful. They are sacred language, a way the soul speaks when words can't hold the pain. Even the prophet cried. Even he, the most beloved to God, had nights where tears fell for his people, for his family, for his Lord. And yet we treat crying as a weakness, a failure, a defect. But what if crying is your turning point? What if the moment you finally break is the moment you finally open? Al-Kindi said, the soul is purified not by ignoring pain, but by reflecting upon it. Reflection is not a mental exercise. It is emotional honesty. It's asking yourself, why does this hurt so much? What am I really afraid of? What part of me still needs love? It's sitting alone and saying, I don't know the answers, but I'm not going to numb this anymore. And that's when things begin to change. Because when you stop running, you give your soul space to return. To reconnect. To feel the presence of God. To remember what matters. In stillness, the soul hears things it forgot. Like, I am enough. I am not alone. I am held. Al-Kindi understood the human condition. That the heart longs for harmony, but it gets lost in the noise of life. That we build walls to protect ourselves, not realizing we also block the light. That pain is not the enemy. It's the compass. The crack where the light enters. The ache that says, look here. This is where you're needed most. What would happen if you stopped fighting your feelings? What would happen if you simply sat with your sadness? Not judged it, not solved it, just held it. Maybe it would soften. Maybe it would tell you something. Maybe it would lead you home. Because the truth is, you don't need to become someone else to deserve peace. You just need to become honest. That's all God ever asked for. Not perfection, but sincerity. A heart that turns, even trembling, is still turning. A tear in the middle of the night can weigh more in the heavens than 1,000 words. You are not too damaged. You are not too late. You are not too much. You are simply human, learning, forgetting, remembering. And through it all, you are loved by the one who never forgets you. The final peace, Al-Kindi wrote, comes when the soul returns to its source. When it remembers that it was never meant to carry everything. When it surrenders and says, I trust, I release, I return. So tonight, don't distract yourself. Don't scroll. Don't run. Sit with yourself. And let the tears come, if they need to. There is healing in them. There is truth in them. There is God in them. You are not weak for feeling. You are not lost for hurting. You are not alone in your sadness. You are exactly where your healing begins. In the stillness. In the surrender. In the softness. This is the start of peace. And it begins when you stop running.